Now to the verdict just a short time ago in the case of that husband and father in Virginia, accused of killing his wife so he could have a new life with his au pair. The jury finding him guilty on all counts just moments ago, and here's Mola Lengi.
On February 24, 2023, the silence of Herndon, Virginia, was shattered by a 911 call that sounded like a hero's tragedy. A husband, a wife, and an intruder. But as the smoke cleared, investigators realized the bodies on the floor weren't the result of a home invasion. They were the final pieces of a months-long performance. This wasn't a crime of passion, it was a cold-blooded casting call for a murder. Juliana Pers Magalhães stepped off the plane and into her new life in America. The young Brazilian woman had come to Virginia as an au pair, hired to care for the 4-year-old daughter of Brendan and Christine Banfield. The family lived in Herndon, a comfortable suburb where lawns were manicured and neighbors knew each other by name. Christine Banfield was 37 years old, a pediatric intensive care nurse who had dedicated her career to helping children. Her work extended beyond the hospital. She had previously worked with sexual assault victims, bringing compassion and expertise to those who needed it most. She worked long hours, pouring herself into saving young lives. Brendan Banfield appeared to be a devoted husband and father. Their daughter was the center of their world, and hiring an au pair seemed like a practical solution for a busy working family. Juliana moved into their home. Her job was simple: care for the child, help around the house, and be part of the family. While Christine pulled double shifts in the pediatric ICU, saving the lives of other people's children, her husband and her au pair were rewriting the rules of her household. Under the same roof where Christine slept between shifts, Brendan and Juliana began a sexual relationship. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was structural. The woman hired to protect the family was now sleeping with its foundation. October 2022, the seed of murder. Brendan didn't want a divorce. Divorce is expensive. Divorce is public. Divorce means sharing custody. He didn't want to lose his assets. He wanted to lose his wife. In the quiet moments after their daughter fell asleep, the pillow talk turned from romance to logistics. The goal was simple: Christine had to die and someone else had to take the fall. Late 2022, early 2023, building the trap. They opened Christine's laptop, the same one she used for work and family photos, and logged onto FetLife. Using Christine's identity, they built a digital lure. They weren't looking for a lover, they were hunting for a scapegoat. They crafted a rape fantasy profile specifically designed to bring a stranger to their door at the exact moment they needed a villain. Brendan Banfield walked into a gun store and purchased a firearm. He gave it to Juliana. Over the following weeks, he took her to a local gun range. Again and again, they practiced. Juliana learned to hold the weapon, to aim, to fire. She was being trained not for self-defense, but for execution. Everything was being prepared with cold precision. Through the fake FetLife profile, they made contact with Joseph Ryan. He was 38 years old, a resident of Washington, D.C. who lived with his elderly grandmother to care for her. His aunt would later describe him as inquisitive, curious, smart, and charming. He loved martial arts and enjoyed role-playing games with friends. Joseph Ryan believed he was communicating with Christine Banfield, a consenting adult who wanted to explore a fantasy. He had no connection to this family. He didn't know he was being set up. He didn't know he was walking into a trap that would cost him his life. That morning, they didn't pack a lunch for their daughter. They packed her off to the basement. While the 4-year-old sat in the dark, Joseph Ryan walked through the front door, expecting a consensual fantasy. He was met with a bullet. Brendan fired first. As Joseph lay dying, Juliana, trained by Brendan at the range, fired the second. Then, Brendan turned the blade on his wife. 7 times. The nurse who spent her life healing was butchered in the room where she slept. The execution ended. The theater began. Brendan grabbed handfuls of his wife's cooling blood and smeared it onto Joseph Ryan's body, painting a masterpiece of self-defense. He was careful. His own DNA stayed off the knife, leaving only the victims behind. For 8 months, the lie held. Brendan and Juliana even kept a framed photo of themselves together on the nightstand, a victory trophy placed in the very room where the carpet had been soaked in Christine's blood. When police arrived, They saw a traumatized husband who had just failed to save his wife, 2 bodies, a child in the basement, and a story that seemed to make sense. 8 months after the murders, the investigation that had been quietly continuing reached a critical point. Digital forensics had traced the fake FetLife account back to Christine's laptop. Blood spatter analysts had examined the scene and found inconsistencies. The timeline didn't match. The evidence didn't support the claims. On October 23, 2023, Juliana Persmagelhes was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The 23-year-old au pair who had once seemed like a witness to tragedy was now a suspect in a double homicide. Nearly a year after Juliana's arrest, authorities had built their case against the man they believed orchestrated everything. On September 18, 2024, Brendan Banfield was arrested and charged with murder. The husband who claimed to have tried to save his wife was now accused of killing her. Facing overwhelming evidence, Juliana Persmagelhes made a decision. She agreed to plead guilty to involuntary manslaughter in exchange for testifying against Brendan Banfield. Prosecutors recommended a sentence of time served. It was a deal designed to ensure that the full truth came out in court, that Brendan Banfield would face justice for orchestrating the murders. Brendan Banfield's trial began in early 2026, nearly 3 years after the murders. The courtroom was packed. Juliana Persmagelhes took the witness stand. She described how the affair began 10 months after she moved in, how Brendan told her in October 2022 that he wanted to get rid of his wife, how they sat at Christine's own laptop and created the fake FetLife profile together, crafting the perfect bait. She testified that Brendan bought the gun on January 28, 2023, and gave it to her, that he took her to the gun range repeatedly, training her to shoot. She described how they contacted Joseph Ryan through the fake profile, setting up the meeting for February 24th. Then came the most chilling testimony. She told the jury how they took the 4-year-old daughter to the basement that morning, how they entered the bedroom where Joseph Ryan was waiting, how Brendan shot him first, how she saw Ryan still moving and fired the second shot that killed him. She described crouching behind the bed, covering her eyes and ears, while Brendan stabbed Christine 7 times in the neck. She testified about the staging, how Brendan took handfuls of Christine's blood and dripped it onto Joseph Ryan's body, how they called 911 and played their roles perfectly. The prosecution presented the digital trail, the fake account traced to Christine's laptop, the blood spatter evidence that contradicted the self-defense story, the gun purchase records, the range visits, the timeline that proved premeditation. They showed the framed photograph found on the master bedroom nightstand months after the murders, Brendan and Juliana smiling together, displayed in the room where Christine had been killed. The jury heard testimony about how Brendan's DNA was notably absent from the knife used to kill Christine. Only her blood and Joseph's DNA were found on the blade, evidence of careful planning to avoid direct incrimination. After several days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty on 2 counts of aggravated murder, 1 count of using a firearm in committing a felony, and child endangerment. Brendan Banfield showed no emotion as the verdict was read. He faces mandatory life in prison without the possibility of parole. His sentencing is scheduled for May 8, 2026. The day after Valentine's Day, Juliana Persmagelhes stood before Fairfax Chief Circuit Court Judge Penny S. Ascaret for sentencing. Prosecutors had recommended time served as part of the plea agreement. Judge Ascaret rejected the recommendation. Looking at the young woman who had helped murder 2 innocent people, the judge spoke of an intentional and calculated level of violence that is the most serious manslaughter scenario that this court has ever seen. The judge delivered the maximum possible sentence, 10 years in prison plus 2 years suspended. Juliana had already served approximately 2 years and 5 months. she still had roughly 7 to 8 more years behind bars. Before sentencing, Joseph Ryan's mother, Deirdre Fisher, addressed the court. She spoke of her son being taken from her cruelly and callously on February 24, 2023. She described losing her confidant, someone who knew her deeply, who listened without judgment, who offered advice with her best interests at heart. Joseph Ryan had been lured to that house under false pretenses. He thought he was meeting someone for consensual adult activity. Instead, he was used as a pawn in a murder plot and executed in cold blood. He never had a chance. Christine Banfield's family sat in the courtroom, watching justice unfold for a woman who could no longer speak for herself, the nurse who had dedicated her life to healing children, the mother who had worked to provide for her daughter, the wife who had trusted the wrong people. On May 8, 2026, Brendan Banfield will hear the words, "life without parole." Juliana will spend the next decade behind bars, but the real sentence belongs to a young girl who went to the basement with a family and came back up an orphan. Joseph Ryan and Christine Banfield weren't just victims of a crime, they were victims of a calculation. It's a reminder that the most dangerous stranger isn't the one at the door, it's the one already in the house.